Have you ever felt that tension? That weird divide between two worlds that feel like they should never, ever talk to each other? On one side, you've got hard science. We're talking facts, biology, quantum mechanics. And on the other, you've got that intuitive, almost spiritual feeling of connection, of unity. This idea that we're all part of something much, much bigger. It's the classic showdown, right? The lab coat versus the tie-dye shirt. And we're kind of taught to keep these in separate boxes. One's for the lecture hall, the other's for a yoga retreat. The whole idea of universal oneness can sound a little, well, like a hippie slogan. It can feel like wishful thinking. And honestly, my inner skeptical alarm usually starts blaring. But here's the thing. What if that skepticism is actually scientifically outdated? Now that is the huge question we are diving into. What if that feeling of unity isn't just a nice sentiment, but a cold, hard, physical, and biological fact? What if science and spirituality are just using different languages to talk about the very same reality?
Okay, so let's get into it. We're going to build this case piece by piece. First up, we're going to explore what I'm calling reality's hidden network. This is the physical hardware of our interconnection. Then we'll look at the illusion of me, the cognitive software that makes us all feel so separate. And finally, we'll see how we can reboot our whole perspective to reconnect with what's actually real.
Right, let's start with the hard stuff, the physical evidence. Because if we're going to make a claim this big, that interdependence is real, we've got to look at the actual nuts and bolts of it all, from our own bodies all the way out to the cosmos.
We all know that phrase, survival of the fittest, right? And we usually picture it as some kind of gladiator match to the death. Well, this one idea from the biologist Lynn Margulis just completely flips that whole story on its head.
So Margulis was a huge champion of this concept called endosymbiosis. The theory basically goes like this. About 2 billion years ago, a big single-celled organism swallowed a smaller bacterium. But, and this is the key part, instead of digesting it, they struck a deal. The little bug was fantastic at creating energy, and the big one offered a safe place to live.
And that little bacterium, it eventually became the mitochondria, the power plants that are in every single one of your cells today. They even still have their own separate DNA. So think about what this means. At your most fundamental biological level, you aren't really an individual. You're a walking, talking community, a living testament to cooperation.
Okay, so now let's zoom out from our cells to the entire planet. The Gaia hypothesis, which was developed by the scientist James Lovelock, isn't some mystical idea. It's a proper scientific theory that suggests the Earth is a single, self-regulating system, kind of like how your own body works to maintain a constant temperature.
And this is just a brilliant example of one of those feedback loops. Check this out. Tiny little plankton in the ocean get stressed out by too much sunlight. So they release a chemical that floats up into the atmosphere and literally helps create clouds. Those clouds then reflect the sunlight back into space, which cools down the ocean and relieves the stress on the plankton. They are literally making their own shade on a planetary scale. It's wild.
Now let's zoom out even further, from the planetary to the cosmic scale. We've all seen this classic line from Carl Sagan on posters, right? It sounds beautiful, poetic, maybe a little metaphorical. But it's not a metaphor. It is a statement of shocking, literal fact.
The carbon in your muscles, the iron in your blood, none of those heavier elements even existed at the beginning of the universe. They were all cooked up inside massive stars that, after billions of years, exploded in supernovas, scattering all that material across the galaxy. That cloud of stardust eventually cooled, clumped together, and became, well, us.
So this all leads to the biggest question, doesn't it? If the hardware of reality, from our cells to the stars, is built on this deep foundation of unity and connection, then why on earth do we feel so separate? This brings us to the software, the powerful cognitive illusion of me.
Most of us think our eyes are like little windows, just passively taking in a perfect picture of the world out there. But according to neuroscientist Anil Seth, that's completely wrong. See, your brain is locked inside a dark, silent vault, your skull. All it ever gets are these ambiguous electrical signals. It doesn't see reality. It actively predicts it. It's making its best guess.
So, where does that constant feeling of being me even come from? Neuroscientists now believe it's largely constructed by a specific brain network called the default mode network. You can think of it as your brain's internal storyteller. It's most active when your mind is just wandering, daydreaming, worrying about the future, replaying the past. The DMN weaves all those thoughts together into the ongoing story of your life. So that feeling of a separate self, it's not a fundamental truth you're seeing. It's a story your brain is telling itself.
And this isn't even a new idea. Philosophers like Spinoza basically figured this out centuries ago. We walk around thinking we're in the driver's seat, making all these free choices, but we are almost completely unaware of the vast chain of causes. That little dip in blood sugar, a sudden dopamine craving, the social pressure from a friend that led to our choice. We see what we did, but we're totally ignorant of why we did it.
Okay, so if our everyday perception is kind of an illusion, how in the world can we start to align it with this deeper reality of interconnection? Well, this is all about installing a new operating system for our minds, one that's based not on separation, but on connection.
The ancient Stoics were total masters of this. They had this incredibly practical exercise. You just ruthlessly distinguish between what's up to you and what isn't. And when you actually look at their list, you realize pretty quickly that almost everything falls into the not up to us column. Your body, your reputation, what other people think. The only thing you have absolute control over is your own judgment, how you choose to interpret whatever happens. For the Stoics, wisdom is simply understanding where that boundary is and putting all your energy on your side of the line.
And what's wild is that modern neuroscience backs us up with some pretty spooky findings. In Benjamin Libet's famous experiments, he asked people to just flex their wrist whenever they felt the urge. And what he found was that brain activity, this readiness potential, started building up a full second before the person consciously felt they had decided to move. It suggests that our conscious feeling of, "I decided to do that," is often just a story we tell ourselves after our brain has already gotten the ball rolling.
And you can see this biological need for connection so powerfully in something called social baseline theory. The theory basically says that our nervous systems evolved to expect to be around other people. That's our default state. In these studies, when a person is threatened with a mild shock while they're alone, you can see their brain's threat response just goes through the roof. But when they're simply holding the hand of a friend, that response drops dramatically.
So here's the bottom line. Being isolated is metabolically expensive. Our brains are literally hardwired to share the load, to offload stress onto our social networks. In our modern hyper-individualistic culture, which tells us that being dependent on others is a weakness, goes directly against our biological programming. It is literally making us sick. So let's pull all these different threads together for a second. Biology tells us we aren't individuals. We're walking cooperative colonies. Cognition shows us our sense of a separate self is a kind of useful, controlled hallucination. Ontology reveals that to even exist is to be in relationship with something else. Ancient philosophy told us to find wisdom by accepting our place in a larger system. And now, modern neuroscience confirms that our brains are literally built for connection. And all of this, it all points to a really radical conclusion. We spend so much of our lives on this hamster wheel of self-improvement, trying to build a better, stronger ego. But what if the self is just a filter that's distorting reality? Then maybe the goal isn't to become something new at all. Maybe the real goal is just to stop doing something, to stop generating that powerful illusion of separation.
And this is the question I really want to leave you with. The Buddhist master Thich Nhat Hanh used to say that if you look deeply into a simple sheet of paper, you can see the cloud that brought the rain that helped the tree to grow. If you take the cloud out of the paper can't exist. So the final question is, what would you do differently right now, in this moment, if you knew for an absolute fact that you were the cloud in the paper? That's where the real work begins.